Most men go through life believing attraction is something spoken, something clear, something obvious. But the truth is far more subtle than that. Attraction rarely starts with words. It starts with signals, small behaviors, micro-expressions, shifts in energy that most people never learn how to read. And because of that, many men miss moments that were actually designed for them to notice. Not because they were rejected, but because they were unaware. And awareness changes everything. One of the earliest and strongest signals a woman gives is eye behavior. Not just looking, but the pattern behind it. When a woman is not interested, her gaze is brief, detached, and never returns. But when there is curiosity, something changes. She looks at you longer than necessary, then quickly looks away, as if she didn't mean to be caught. But then she comes back again, and again. This repeated cycle of looking, breaking, and returning is not random. It is the mind testing comfort, safety, and curiosity all at once. Most men, however, misread this moment because they are waiting for verbal confirmation that never comes. So they ignore the very signal that was meant to be understood silently. But eye contact is only the beginning. Another powerful and often overlooked signal is body orientation and proximity. When a woman is interested, her body starts to align itself toward you without conscious effort. Her feet point in your direction. Her shoulders turn slightly toward your presence. And slowly, she reduces the physical distance between you and her. She may sit closer than needed, stand in your space a little longer, or position herself in ways that make interaction easier. This is not coincidence. Human beings naturally protect their personal space unless comfort has been established. So when she enters your space willingly, something unspoken is happening. But because most men focus only on what is said, they completely miss what is being physically communicated right in front of them. Another subtle but extremely revealing signal is self-adjustment behavior. When a woman becomes aware of someone she is drawn to, her body reacts automatically. She may start fixing her hair more frequently, adjusting her clothing, smoothing her dress, touching her neck, or subtly changing her posture. These actions are not planned. They are unconscious responses triggered by awareness and emotional stimulation. The mind becomes slightly more alert, and the body tries to present itself in a better way without permission. This is where most men misinterpret the situation. They assume she is just being natural or simply adjusting herself out of habit. But in reality, these small movements often reveal a deeper level of attention and internal awareness that words have not yet expressed. And then there's one of the most powerful signals of all, emotional mirroring. When a woman is emotionally engaged, she begins to sync with your behavior without realizing it. If you speak slowly, she begins to match your pace. If you lean back, she mirrors your posture. If you smile softly, she reflects that same expression back to you. Even the rhythm of conversation starts to align. This is not imitation for attention. This is subconscious connection forming. The human brain naturally mirrors people it feels drawn to because mirroring builds comfort and emotional bonding. Yet most men never notice this shift happening because they're too focused on trying to impress rather than observing what is already happening naturally. But the signals do not stop there. There's also something deeper happening in how she responds emotionally. A woman who is interested will often become slightly more reactive to your presence. She may laugh more easily at your words, even when they are not particularly funny. She may respond faster, engage more actively, or seem slightly more energized when you are around. This is not forced behavior. It is emotional elevation. Her mood subtly adjusts based on your presence. But again, most men miss this because they're looking for dramatic signs instead of subtle shifts. Another overlooked signal is playful resistance. Sometimes a woman may slightly challenge your words, tease you, or push back in a light, playful way. This is not rejection. In many cases, it is engagement. It is a way of creating emotional tension, testing confidence, and building interaction. When done with interest, it is a sign of comfort, not conflict. But many men misread this moment completely and withdraw instead of understanding the dynamic being created. The truth is, attraction is rarely loud. It does not announce itself. It whispers through behavior, through movement, through subtle repetition. And the men who learn to observe instead of assume begin to see an entirely different reality. They realize that many moments they thought were nothing were actually full of meaning. They realize that communication was happening all along, just not in the way they expected. Because women often show interest long before they ever express it. And the difference between confusion and clarity is not what is happening. It is whether you are trained to see it. And once you start noticing these patterns, you will understand something powerful. You are not ignored as often as you thought. You are simply not aware of the language being spoken without words. Because in the end, attraction is never just spoken. It is displayed. And the man who learns to read it will always move differently in life, calmer, clearer, and far more confident in what is actually happening around him. Once you start understanding basic body language, you begin to realize something even deeper. Attraction is not just physical behavior. It is psychological alignment. A woman does not only respond to how you look or what you say. She responds to how she feels around your internal state, your calmness, your emotional stability, your unpredictability, your presence. And most men completely underestimate this level of communication because it cannot be seen directly. It must be felt. One of the deeper psychological signals is emotional safety testing. This happens when a woman subtly checks how you react under small moments of pressure. She may say something slightly provocative, delay her response, or create mild uncertainty in the interaction. This is not disrespect. It is subconscious evaluation. She is not trying to hurt you. She is trying to understand you. And in that moment, your reaction becomes the signal. If you react emotionally, chase approval, or over-explain yourself, you lose grounding. But if you remain calm, stable, and unaffected, something shifts in her perception. She begins to associate you with emotional strength rather than emotional dependency. Another deeper signal is inconsistency in attention. A woman who is genuinely curious will not always be predictable in how she engages. One moment she is highly engaged, responsive, and open. The next moment she pulls back slightly. This is not confusion. This is internal conflict between emotion and control. Her mind is trying to balance interest with caution. And in this phase, many men make a critical mistake. They panic. They chase. They try to restore connection immediately. But what they don't realize is that this push and pull is often where attraction is formed or lost. The man who remains steady during distance becomes more valuable than the man who collapses into neediness. There's also a deeper phenomenon called unconscious prioritization. When a woman begins to show interest, she starts adjusting her attention patterns without realizing it. She responds faster to you than others. She remembers small details you said earlier. She becomes more aware of your presence in group settings. This is not deliberate. It is cognitive priority shifting. Her mind is placing you slightly higher in relevance compared to others. But because these changes are subtle, most men never notice that they are being mentally categorized differently in real time. And then comes one of the most powerful psychological indicators, emotional anchoring. This is when a woman begins associating certain feelings with your presence. If she feels calm, amused, safe, or intrigued around you repeatedly, her mind starts linking those emotional states to you as a person. So even when you're not around, she begins to feel a subtle pull toward that emotional memory. This is why presence matters more than performance. You're not just interacting with her in the moment. You are building emotional impressions that stay after you leave. But here is where it becomes even more interesting. Many men think attraction is about doing more, talking more, impressing more, proving more. In reality, deeper attraction often grows in the opposite direction. It grows in restraint, in control, in emotional stability, in the ability to not overreact, not overpursue, and not overexplain. Because every time a man overextends himself emotionally, he reduces mystery. And without mystery, attraction begins to flatten. Psychologically, The mind is drawn to what it cannot fully predict. This is why unpredictability within emotional control is so powerful. A man who is always available, always reactive, and always predictable becomes easy to understand. And what is easily understood is rarely deeply desired. But a man who remains composed, who does not chase emotional fluctuations, who maintains his direction regardless of external behavior, creates psychological space. And in that space, curiosity grows. Another overlooked psychological layer is value perception through absence. When you're not constantly available, not constantly responding, not constantly giving attention, your presence begins to carry weight. Not because you are playing games, but because your time is not overflowing outward without control. And the human mind naturally assigns more value to what is not excessively available. This is not manipulation. It is perception psychology. At the deepest level, attraction is not about signs alone. It is about internal interpretation. Two men can experience the same signals, the same eye contact, the same proximity, the same behavior, yet interpret it completely differently. One sees confusion, the other sees opportunity. One hesitates, the other understands. And that difference is not in what is happening outside. It is in the level of awareness inside. So when you step back and look at it honestly, most missed opportunities are not about rejection. They are about unread signals, misunderstood behavior, and untrained perception. Because the truth is, people are always communicating. Not always with words, but always with patterns, always with behavior, always with energy. And the man who learns to read those patterns without emotion, controlling his interpretation, will always see more than others. Not because he is lucky, but because he is aware. At a deeper level of understanding, you begin to realize something uncomfortable but important. Not every signal that looks like attraction is actually attraction. Some behaviors are genuine emotional interest, while others are strategic, unconscious, or even manipulative in nature. And most men never learn the difference. They assume attention equals interest. They assume proximity equals attraction. They assume emotional engagement equals desire. But reality is far more complex, and misunderstanding this is where many men lose control of their judgment. Real attraction always feels natural, consistent, and emotionally grounded. It is not forced, and it does not create confusion in patterns that feel unstable or draining. When a woman is genuinely interested, her behavior may be subtle, but it carries emotional alignment. Her attention is not random. It returns with warmth. Her engagement is not chaotic. It feels steady, even if playful or shy. And most importantly, her energy does not feel like a game being played with your mind. It feels like a connection forming gradually, even if unspoken. But manipulation signals feel different once you learn to observe carefully. They often come in waves of inconsistency, designed to control attention rather than express emotion. One moment there's strong engagement, interest, and presence. The next moment there is distance, silence, or emotional withdrawal without explanation. This push and pull pattern is not always conscious, but it can be used intentionally or unintentionally to create emotional dependency. Because when attention becomes unpredictable, the mind starts focusing more, not less. And many men mistake this increased mental focus as deeper attraction, when in reality, it is emotional uncertainty being triggered. Another key difference is intention behind attention. Real attraction is expressive. It seeks connection. It wants to understand you. Even when a woman is shy or reserved, there is still a sense of emotional direction moving toward familiarity. But manipulative or non-genuine signals often revolve around control perception. Attention is given, then withdrawn. Interest is shown, then hidden. Not to build connection, but to maintain power over how you respond. And the danger is not in the behavior itself, but in how easily it can pull emotionally reactive men into chasing something that was never stable to begin with. One of the clearest psychological distinctions is emotional consistency over time. Genuine attraction may fluctuate slightly due to mood or environment, but it does not create long-term confusion. You're not constantly asking yourself where you stand. You're not repeatedly trying to decode basic behavior. There's clarity even in silence. But manipulative patterns thrive in uncertainty. They keep you analyzing. They keep you guessing. They keep your attention locked in a loop of interpretation rather than direction. And here is the deeper truth most men miss. Confusion is not attraction. Confusion is a signal that your emotional system is being activated without stable feedback. When someone is truly aligned with you, your mind does not stay in constant doubt. You may still be curious, but you are not mentally unstable about the situation. You are not overanalyzing every small action for meaning. Real attraction creates grounded curiosity. Manipulation creates emotional imbalance. Another advanced layer is control through validation cycles. Some interactions are designed, consciously or unconsciously, to make you feel chosen at certain moments. You receive attention, warmth, or emotional closeness that feels meaningful. Then it is removed. This cycle creates a psychological loop where the brain begins to crave the return of that positive feeling. And over time, the man begins to associate inconsistency with depth. But in reality, depth does not require emotional instability. Depth feels secure, even when it is quiet. The most dangerous misunderstanding happens when men start rewarding inconsistency with more effort. Instead of stepping back, they lean in harder. Instead of observing behavior objectively, they interpret distance as something they must fix. But real attraction does not require you to chase clarity. It naturally becomes clearer with time. You do not have to force understanding when something is real. And this is where Stoic awareness becomes powerful. When you remove emotional reactivity from your interpretation, you begin to see behavior as data instead of emotion. You stop assigning meaning too quickly. You stop reacting to every shift in attention. And most importantly, you stop confusing stimulation for connection. Because at the end of the day, real attraction is not chaotic. It is not mentally exhausting. It does not make you feel like you're constantly solving a puzzle just to understand your place in someone's life. Real attraction may be subtle, but it is stable in its direction. And anything that requires you to lose emotional balance just to interpret it is not clarity, it is distortion. And once a man learns this difference, everything changes. He no longer overvalues attention. He no longer misreads inconsistency. He no longer confuses emotional spikes with emotional truth. He simply observes, understands, and moves with awareness instead of assumption. Because in the end, the strongest form of masculinity is not chasing signals. It is knowing which signals are real enough to follow and which ones were never meant for you to begin with. At the end of everything, after all the signals, all the confusion, all the analysis, and all the psychological patterns, there's a truth most men eventually come face to face with. Attraction was never meant to be something you chase, decode endlessly, or emotionally suffer through. It was never designed to drain your peace or keep your mind stuck in constant interpretation. And yet, many men spend months, even years, trapped in that exact cycle, overthinking behavior, misreading signals, and searching for clarity in places where their own emotional control is what was missing all along. Because the real shift does not happen when you learn more signs. It happens when you stop needing them to validate your direction in life. A man who is grounded in himself does not obsess over every glance, every pause, every change in tone. He observes, yes. He understands, yes. But he does not lose himself in interpretation. He does not abandon his focus, his discipline, or his purpose just because someone's behavior feels uncertain. Instead, he stays centered, and that centeredness becomes his real advantage. And this is where Stoic masculinity becomes more than just understanding attraction. It becomes identity. A man who is emotionally controlled, mentally clear, and internally stable no longer moves like someone seeking confirmation. He moves like someone who already knows his value is not defined by inconsistent attention. He no longer builds his confidence on signals from others, but on the structure of his own discipline, his own goals, and his own standards. At this stage, something powerful begins to happen naturally. You stop over-pursuing. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-investing in uncertainty. Not because you are cold, but because you are clear. And clarity is one of the strongest masculine traits a man can develop. When you are clear within yourself, confusion outside of you loses its power. And ironically, this is the point where everything shifts in your external world as well. Because people, especially in social and emotional dynamics, tend to respond more strongly to men who are not emotionally reactive. When you're not easily shaken, not easily pulled, and not easily controlled by attention or absence, your presence starts to carry weight. Not because you're trying to appear powerful, but because you're no longer leaking emotional neediness into every interaction. But the most important realization is this. Your life was never meant to be centered around decoding other people's behavior. It was meant to be built. Your energy was never meant to be consumed by guessing interest. It was meant to be invested into direction. And the more you shift your focus from interpretation to creation, the more your entire experience of life changes. Because in truth, the strongest men are not the ones who understand every signal perfectly. They're the ones who no longer need signals to stay grounded in themselves. They do not chase validation disguised as attention. They do not lose discipline over temporary emotional stimulation. They do not confuse unpredictability with meaning. They simply stay aligned with their path, regardless of external noise. And once you reach that state, attraction becomes something very different. It is no longer something you chase or fear missing. It becomes something you naturally encounter as a result of who you are becoming. You're not trying to be noticed. You're not trying to be chosen. You're not trying to decode your place in someone else's behavior. You are simply building a life so solid, so structured, and so self-directed that attention becomes a byproduct, not a goal. So the final truth is simple. Stop chasing signals. Stop overanalyzing behavior. Stop building emotional meaning out of uncertainty. And start building yourself into a man who is no longer confused by what he sees, because he is already grounded in who he is. Because in the end, Stoic masculinity is not about reading others perfectly. It is about becoming so stable internally that nothing outside of you can pull you away from your center. And that is the real power most men are searching for without realizing it was never in the signals. It was always in themselves.